He stood up to ruin my wedding. He didn't know I had a button under the altar that would detonate his entire world. Everyone tells you about your wedding day. They talk about it in these breathless, sacred tones. The happiest day of your life, a beginning, a fairy tale. They show you magazines with impossible dresses and towering cakes. They help you pick out flowers, agonizing over the subtle differences between ivory and cream. They want to know your colors. They want to know your song. They never talk about the cost. Not the checks you write to the caterer or the florist. That's just money. The real cost is measured in truth. The price of admission to a happily ever after is sometimes a piece of your own soul. The part of you that used to believe in things like simple goodness and the benefit of the doubt. I paid that price. I paid it in full, right there, in a silent church, with a 30-second audio clip on a USB stick disguised as a wedding playlist. You're probably wondering why. Why a bride, on the day she's supposed to be a symbol of love and hope, would become an architect of ruin. To understand that, you have to understand what came before the ashes. You have to understand the dream. His name is Liam, or I suppose his name is Liam. That hasn't changed. When I met him, it was like the universe finally exhaled. I was a graphic designer, living a life painted in Pantone color codes and client revisions. My world was ordered, creative, but quiet. Liam was a symphony. He was a junior architect at his family's prestigious firm, but he didn't have the arrogance that usually comes with that kind of legacy. He had this laugh that seemed to start in his toes, and he saw the world not as it was, but as it could be. He'd point out the structural flaws in an old building, then spend the next 10 minutes redesigning it in the air with his hands, his eyes full of passion. He saw potential everywhere. He saw it in me. He loved my work, my mind, the way I saw the world in shapes and shades. With him, I wasn't just Chloe, the reliable designer. I was an artist, a visionary. He made me feel seen, truly and completely, for the first time in my life. Our love story wasn't a whirlwind. It was a construction, slow, deliberate, and built on a foundation so solid I thought nothing could ever shake it. We dated for 2 years. We moved in together after 1. We built a life that felt like a fortress of quiet joy. And then there was his family, the prestigious Beaumonts. Their name was etched onto plaques on university buildings and hospital wings. They weren't just wealthy, they were a dynasty. Their home was less a house and more a museum, filled with ancestral portraits whose eyes seemed to follow you, judging your posture and your pedigree. In that world of polished silver and silent judgment, Liam was an anomaly of warmth. His parents were polite, distant, a perfectly curated performance of familial affection. But then there was Ethan. Ethan was the older brother, the heir apparent, the golden child. While Liam dreamed of designing beautiful spaces, Ethan managed the money that built them. He was everything Liam wasn't: sharp, slick, with a politician's smile and a shark's eyes. When I first met him, he oozed a charisma that was almost overwhelming. He shook my hand, held it for a second too long, and said, "So you're the one who's finally tamed our wild architect." We were beginning to lose hope. He said it with a laugh, and everyone else laughed too. But it wasn't a joke. It was a proclamation, a subtle reminder that Liam belonged to them, and I was an outsider, a visitor who had been granted a temporary visa. I wanted their approval so badly, for Liam's sake. I told myself their coolness was just caution. I was a girl from a middle-class background, a world away from their charity galas and summer homes in the Hamptons. I worked for everything I had. They had been given everything and were terrified of losing it. So I tried. I learned about wine. I read the financial papers. I smiled through backhanded compliments that were delivered with such surgical precision, you didn't feel the sting until hours later. Ethan was the master of this. He made it a sport. We'd be at a family dinner, and he'd casually bring up my alma mater, a state school, and compare it to his and Liam's Ivy League legacy. "It's wonderful that schools like that give people a chance to climb," he'd say, his voice dripping with false sincerity. Chloe is a testament to that. He was framing me as a charity case, a project. He planted seeds, tiny, poisonous seeds of doubt. If Liam and I had a minor disagreement, Ethan would pull him aside later, his voice a low murmur of brotherly concern. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw the effect. Liam would come back to me, a little more distant, a little more questioning. "Ethan was just saying he's worried you're under a lot of pressure with the wedding planning," he'd say. "He thinks you seem a bit fragile." It was his favorite word for me. He painted me as this delicate, emotional creature, all artistic temperament and no substance, someone who needed to be managed. He was subtly building a case against me, positioning himself as Liam's protector, the wise counsel against the unpredictable influence of a woman he hadn't chosen. And the worst part? It was working, not because Liam believed him, not entirely, but because Ethan's influence was like water erosion, a constant, gentle pressure that wears away even the strongest stone over time. Liam loved his brother, trusted him implicitly. He couldn't see the rot behind the smile. The proposal was beautiful, a quiet moment, just the two of us, in the apartment we'd built together. It was real. It was ours. But the moment we announced the engagement, Ethan's campaign escalated. It was no longer just about planting doubts. It was about sabotage. He'd forget to pass along messages from the wedding planner. He'd offer to help with the budget, then present me with a spreadsheet so convoluted it was designed to make me look incompetent. He'd recommend vendors who were notoriously difficult, then feign surprise when things went wrong. "Oh, Chloe," he'd say with that placid, infuriating calm, "you have to be more assertive with these people. This world can be tough if you're not used to it." I was drowning. I was planning the happiest day of my life while simultaneously fighting a silent war with the one person who should have been our biggest champion. Liam was caught in the middle, blinded by brotherly love. He saw Ethan's actions as clumsy attempts to help. I saw them for what they were, a systematic effort to break me down, to prove to Liam that I was not fit to join their family. That I was, and always would be, an outsider. That I would eventually crack under the pressure. He was right about that last part. I was about to crack, but not in the way he expected. The breaking point came 2 weeks before the wedding. The Beaumonts were hosting a final dinner for the wedding party at their estate. It was a night of forced smiles and suffocating pleasantries. I felt like a specimen under a microscope. After the main course, I went to retrieve my wrap from the guest room where the coats were kept. The door was slightly ajar, and I heard his voice, Ethan's voice. But it was different. The silken, charming veneer was gone. This was him, raw and uncut. He was on the phone. "I don't care what Dad said," Ethan spat into the phone. "I'll handle it. She's got him completely fooled, this little Cinderella with her art school degree. He's about to sign his life away." There was a pause. I held my breath, my blood turning to ice. "No, I'm not going to just let it happen," he continued, his voice low and venomous. "I'm the best man. I have a responsibility to speak up if I see him making the biggest mistake of his life, and I'll do it. At the altar, in front of everyone. When the priest asks if anyone objects, I'm going to stand up. I'll tell them all how she's been manipulating him, how she's just in it for the money. I'll make sure she's so humiliated she'll have no choice but to run out of that church with her tail between her legs. He'll be heartbroken for a week, and then he'll thank me for the rest of his life for saving him." I didn't breathe. I couldn't. My entire world tilted on its axis. The tiny cuts, the subtle poisons, the gaslighting, it all coalesced into this one monstrous truth. It wasn't just disapproval. It was a planned public execution. He was going to turn my wedding, the symbol of my love for Liam, into a stage for my character assassination. He was going to destroy me in front of my family, my friends, and the man I loved. He was going to use Liam's love for me as the very weapon to drive me away. I backed away from the door, my movements stiff and robotic. I walked back to the dinner table on autopilot, the sound of polite laughter and clinking glasses feeling like it was coming from another planet. I sat down. I picked up my wine glass. My hand was perfectly steady. Liam smiled at me from across the table, his eyes full of love, completely oblivious. Ethan returned a few minutes later, his charming mask perfectly back in place. He caught my eye and gave me a small conspiratorial wink, as if we were both in on the same joke. In that moment, he signed his own death warrant. My first impulse, The one that screamed in my veins was to stand up right there and expose him, to throw the contents of my wine glass in his smug face and watch his mask shatter, to run to Liam, to tell him everything, to make him see the brother he idolized was a snake. But I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that it wouldn't work. It would be my word against his, the word of the fragile, emotional outsider against the golden sun. Ethan would twist it. He'd claim I misunderstood. He'd say I was hysterical, that the wedding pressure was making me paranoid. He would look at Liam with those earnest, concerned eyes, and he would win. He had spent years laying the groundwork for this moment, for my eventual, inevitable meltdown. If I screamed, I would just be playing my part in his script. The wedding would be called off, our relationship would be fractured by doubt, and Ethan would have achieved his goal. No. I sat there, sipping my wine, and I smiled back at him. It was the most genuine smile I had given all night, because in that instant, a new plan began to form. It was a cold, dark, and intricate thing, born of pure, unadulterated fury. He wanted to make a scene at my wedding. He wanted to turn my day of joy into a spectacle of humiliation. Fine. He could have his spectacle. He could stand up in that holy place and have his moment, but the words that would echo in that church wouldn't be his. They would be mine. He wanted to write the script. I was going to direct the finale. If he wants a show, I thought to myself, staring into the face of the man who had just declared war on my life. I'll give him a finale he will never forget. To catch a monster, you can't just wait for it to walk into a cage. Sometimes, you have to build a cage out of their own wickedness, bait it with their own secrets, and learn to think like a monster yourself. That was my first lesson in the art of revenge. The second was that once you start, there's no going back. So that's how it started. A declaration of war overheard through a half-closed door. I went into that dinner as a bride-to-be, desperate for the approval of my new family. I walked out as a soldier. My fiancé's brother, Ethan, wasn't just a charming manipulator. He was my enemy. He had a plan to publicly humiliate me at the altar, to paint me as a hysterical gold digger and save his brother from my supposedly toxic influence. He thought I would cry. He thought I would run. He underestimated me. He didn't know that when you try to burn a woman's world down, she learns to play with fire. The 2 weeks leading up to my wedding were the longest of my life. On the surface, everything was perfect. There were bridal fittings, cake tastings, seating charts to finalize. I smiled, I nodded. I chose between salmon and steak. I was a flawless imitation of a happy bride, but beneath the surface I was waging a war, and the first casualty of that war was my own innocence. My plan, in the beginning, was simple. I needed proof. Overhearing his plan was one thing, but in a battle of he said, she said, against the family's golden boy, I was a guaranteed loser. I needed Ethan's own voice, his own words weaponized. The question was how to get it. I'm a graphic designer, not a spy. My expertise is in kerning and color theory, not espionage. I felt a tremor of fear, the kind that tells you you're about to step off a cliff. But the memory of his voice, dripping with contempt as he planned my destruction, was a stronger force. It pushed me forward. I spent 2 sleepless nights scrolling through websites I never thought I'd visit. Sites that sold listening devices, tracking gadgets, things that belonged in a spy movie, not the life of a woman planning her honeymoon. My heart hammered against my ribs with every click. This was a line, a big, bright moral line, spying on family. It felt dirty, a violation. But what he was planning was a violation of a different magnitude, so I took a deep breath and crossed it. The device I chose was tiny, smaller than my thumbnail, and voice-activated. It could record for 72 hours on a single charge. Now I just needed a delivery system, a Trojan horse, and the perfect one was staring me right in the face from the wedding gift list. The best man's gift. It was tradition, a gesture of gratitude, or in my case, a perfectly disguised act of war. I bought him a pen. Not just any pen. A ridiculously expensive, absurdly ornate fountain pen. The kind of status symbol Ethan adored. It came in a heavy, silk-lined presentation box. The day I gave it to him, my hands were slick with sweat. He was in his office at the family firm, a temple of glass and steel overlooking the city. He accepted the box with that trademarked charming smile. "Chloe, you shouldn't have," he said, his voice smooth as velvet. He opened it, his eyes gleaming at the sight of the pen. "It's magnificent." "You're Liam's best man," I replied, my own voice a carefully constructed melody of warmth. "You deserve it. For all your help." He didn't even look at the box closely. He just took out the pen, admired it, and placed the open box on his desk. Exactly as I had hoped, it was now a silent witness to his life. The first night I couldn't sleep. I just imagined the little device sitting in the dark, waiting. The next day, I made an excuse to drop off some documents for Liam at the firm. I saw Ethan, told him I'd left a note on his desk. When he was distracted, I swapped the recorder with a decoy and slipped the live one into my purse. My heart felt like it was going to beat its way out of my chest. Walking out of that building felt like leaving the scene of a crime, because it was. I was a criminal now, a thief of secrets. That night, I sat in my home office, the room where I created beautiful things, and prepared to dive into ugliness. I plugged the recorder into my laptop. The files appeared, hours of them. I put on my headphones, closed my eyes, and pressed play. Listening to those recordings was an exercise in psychological torture. Most of it was mind-numbingly boring. Hours of him on the phone with bankers, the rustle of papers, him humming off-key to some terrible 80s song. There were moments I felt a surge of guilt. This was an invasion. But then I'd hear him talking to Liam, his voice dripping with that false brotherly concern, asking if I was holding up okay, and the guilt would evaporate, replaced by cold resolve. I was on my third batch of recordings, 2 days later, when I found it. The first piece of ammunition, it was him, alone in his office after hours. I could hear the clink of a whiskey glass, and then he started talking, rehearsing. "Friends, family," his recorded voice began, smooth and practiced. "I stand here as Liam's brother, and as his best man, a role I take with the utmost seriousness. And it is that seriousness that compels me to speak a difficult truth," he went on. Every venomous, calculated word I had overheard through the door. He painted me as unstable, a manipulator, a woman who had bewitched his innocent younger brother. He even threw in a fabricated story about me having a meltdown over the flower arrangements to prove his point about my fragility. Hearing it again, in the sterile context of a recording, was somehow worse. It was so polished, so utterly devoid of any real emotion except for a cold, clinical desire to destroy. I had him. This was the proof. I could play this for Liam. But as I listened, a cold thought crept in. Would it be enough? Ethan was a master manipulator. He could claim he was just venting, blowing off steam. He could even twist it to say he was practicing a joke speech. It would still create a fissure between the brothers, but it wasn't the clean, undeniable kill shot I needed. He had to be discredited so completely that no one would ever listen to a word he said again. So I kept listening. I went back for the recorder twice more over the next week. I became a ghost. My life a cycle of smiling through wedding preparations by day and sifting through the garbage of Ethan's life by night. The lack of sleep was making me frayed, jumpy. The secrets were a weight in my gut. And then I found something that changed the entire game. It was late. I was on the verge of giving up for the night when I stumbled upon a call between Ethan and his father. Their voices were low, tense. "The auditors are getting curious about the Kensington project," his father said, his voice tight with anxiety. "Did you move the funds like I told you?" "Of course I did," Ethan snapped back. "It's in the secondary holding account, the one Liam doesn't have access to. But Dad, this is getting sloppy. With him getting married, Chloe's sharp. What if she starts asking to see the books? She's not one of us. She's not just going to smile and nod." "She won't get the chance," his father replied, his voice chillingly cold. "You're going to handle it at the wedding. You'll paint her as unstable. The family will close ranks around Liam. By the time he recovers, he'll be so grateful to us for saving him, he won't question a thing. We just need to keep him clear of the real numbers until he's fully vested as a partner." I took my headphones off. My hands were shaking. My breath was gone. This wasn't about jealousy. It wasn't about me not being good enough for their family. I was a business liability. They weren't trying to save Liam from me. They were trying to save their criminal enterprise from my potential influence on him. Liam, my sweet, honest Liam, who dreamed of building beautiful things, was the heir to a company his brother and father were systematically bleeding dry, and I was the threat who could expose it all. The stakes had just skyrocketed from personal humiliation to felony conspiracy. My little revenge plot suddenly felt naive, like bringing a knife to a gunfight. These people weren't just cruel. They were criminals, and they were willing to destroy my life to protect their secrets. The weight of this new knowledge was crushing. I felt like I was living in a different reality from everyone around me. When Liam would come home and kiss me, all I could see was the web of lies his family had spun around him. I became distant, quiet. The constant paranoia of the secret I was carrying was eating me alive. And of course, Liam noticed. He found me one night, just standing in the living room in the dark. He put his hands on my shoulders, his touch gentle, but it felt like a brand. "Chloe, what's going on?" he asked, his voice full of a concern that felt like a knife in my gut. "You're a million miles away. Are you okay? Is this about the wedding? Are you having second thoughts?" I couldn't look at him. If I looked into his honest, loving eyes, I knew I would break. "I'm fine," I whispered, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. "Just stressed. It's a lot to handle." He sighed, and I could feel his frustration, his helplessness. "I know, it's just, Ethan called me today. My blood went cold. He said he was worried about you," Liam continued, his voice troubled. "He said you seemed really unhappy. He asked me if you were pushing me away." There it was, the gaslighting perfected. Using my genuine distress he caused, as evidence against me. He was turning my own pain into a weapon and handing it to the one person I was trying to protect. In that moment, I almost told him. The words were right there, on the tip of my tongue. "Your brother is trying to destroy me. Your father is a crook. Your family is a lie." I wanted to unload the burden, to have him hold me and tell me we would face it together. But I looked at him. I saw his face, his unwavering love for a family I knew was poison. The truth would be a bomb. It would force him to choose between me and them, right before our wedding. And what if he didn't believe me? What if Ethan's years of work had been so effective that my wild, paranoid-sounding accusations would be the final proof he needed that I was fragile? I could lose him. I could lose everything. Right there. So I held it in. I walled off that part of myself. I turned to him, forced a smile that felt like cracking plaster, and lied. "Don't be silly," I said, my voice unnaturally bright. "Of course I'm not pushing you away. Ethan worries too much. It's just wedding jitters. Everything is fine. I promise." He held me, but for the first time I felt no comfort. I felt like a fraud. I was lying to the man I loved, protecting him with a deception that felt like its own kind of betrayal. That was my lowest point. Utterly alone in a war no one else knew I was fighting. I had to win, but I was beginning to wonder if the person I used to be would survive the victory. The pain of that moment, the agony of lying to Liam, changed something in me. The fear was gone, burned away. All that was left was a cold, hard certainty. My goal was no longer just to stop Ethan's objection. My goal was annihilation. I needed a weapon so absolute, so devastating, that it would vaporize their lies on impact. Something that would leave no room for doubt, no possibility of spin. I needed a nuke. I went back to the recordings. But this time I wasn't listening for a plan. I was listening for a soul, for the darkest, most hidden secret that held their rotten family together. I listened for 2 more days, fueled by coffee and a rage that had cooled into something far more dangerous. Purpose. And then I found it. It was on a recording from Ethan's office late one Friday. He and his father were there. They were drinking heavily, arguing, not about money. This was something else. Something old and raw. "You can't hold that over my head forever," Ethan slurred, his voice thick with resentment. "I'm not holding it over your head," his father roared back. "I am protecting this family." "I protected you!" "Do you have any idea what would have happened if anyone found out? You drunk, barely 21 years old? They would have sent you to prison for a decade." My fingers tightened on my mouse. My breathing stopped. "It was an accident," Ethan whispered, his voice cracking. "I didn't see the deer. I swerved. I never meant for her to get hurt." "Her." "But she did." His father's voice was a low growl. "Your mother ended up in a wheelchair because of your stupidity. And I buried it. I bribed the tow truck driver. I paid off the reporting officer. I created the story of a phantom car, a hit and run that let you walk away clean while your mother was learning to live with half a body. We have blamed a ghost for 15 years, Ethan. That is the price of this family. That is the secret that holds us together. Don't you ever forget it." Silence. The recording ended a few moments later. I sat there in the dark, the headphones still on, but I wasn't hearing anything. I was feeling the weight of what I had just found. The family matriarch, a woman I'd only known as a quiet, sad figure in a wheelchair, a victim of a tragic accident. It was all a lie, a cover-up to protect the golden son. This was it, the foundation of the entire Beaumont dynasty. Not their money, not their name. A dark, ugly secret shared between a father and son. A secret that proved what they were capable of, what they were willing to do to protect their own. I moved the cursor. I highlighted the most damning 30 seconds of the conversation. Ethan's confession, his father's confirmation. I clipped it. I cleaned up the audio, removing the background noise, making their voices crisp and clear. I saved the file to my desktop. I named it finale.mp3. This was no longer about stopping an objection. This wasn't even about the fraud. This was about justice, the kind of brutal biblical justice the law could never deliver. I had the button, and I was going to push it. I had lost myself in the pursuit. The woman who was joyfully planning a wedding was gone, replaced by a cold strategist dealing in secrets and lies. But I wasn't done. Not until I stood in that church and watched him face the truth. My journey into darkness was swift. I started as a victim, desperate for proof. I became a spy, planting a bug to catch a liar. But what I found was so much worse than I imagined. It wasn't just about a ruined wedding anymore. It was about a family built on a foundation of fraud, with my fiancé, Liam, as their unwitting shield. The weight of that secret almost broke me, forcing me to lie to the man I was trying to protect. That lie, that moment of utter isolation, burned away the last of my fear. I went back into the recordings, no longer looking for a shield, but for a sword, and I found it. The one secret that held their whole rotten empire together. The lie behind a tragedy that had defined their lives for 15 years. I held their ruin in my hands, condensed into a 30-second audio file. Finale, MP3. The morning of my wedding was unnaturally beautiful. The sky was a brilliant cloudless blue, the kind of storybook sky you pray for. The air was crisp and cool. It felt like the world was putting on a show. A perfect backdrop for the performance I was about to give. There's a strange detachment that comes with knowing you're about to detonate a bomb. Every action feels both incredibly significant and completely meaningless. The scent of the lilies in my bouquet was overpowering. The feel of the silk dress against my skin was a foreign sensation. Everyone around me was a whirlwind of joyful panic. My bridesmaids laughing, my mother crying softly. They were all living in the reality of a wedding day. I was in the green room of a theater of war, waiting for my cue. I had one final, critical task. The sound technician, a young guy named Kevin I'd met during the rehearsal, was my unwitting accomplice. I found him setting up his equipment in the choir loft, a space that smelled of old wood and lemon polish. I handed him the USB stick. My hand was rock steady. "Hi, Kevin," I said, my voice sweet and bridal. "I have a little surprise for Liam. It's a photo slideshow set to music for the reception." He smiled. "No problem. I'll load it right up." "Great," I said, leaning in as if sharing a secret. "There's also one other file on there. It's separate from the slideshow, just an audio track. It's called Finale." I gave him a conspiratorial wink. "It's a little inside joke. During the ceremony, When the priest asks if anyone objects, I know it's weird, but if you see me look up at you and nod, just once, can you play that track? At full volume. It's for a friend of ours who couldn't be here. It'll mean the world to him. He looked puzzled. But a bride gets what a bride wants on her wedding day. A nod. Got it, he said with a shrug. Whatever you want, that was it. The final piece was in place. My entire plan now rested on a stranger's nod-based compliance and the reliability of a $20 piece of technology. The risk was immense. He could forget. The file could be corrupted. He could question it and ask the priest. 1,000 things could go wrong, but as I walked back to my dressing room, I didn't feel fear. I felt a profound, chilling sense of calm. The die was cast. Walking down the aisle was the longest walk of my life. My father was on my arm, his face beaming with a pride that felt like a physical weight. The church was filled with faces, all turned towards me, all smiling. They saw a bride, a symbol of hope and new beginnings. They had no idea they were about to be witnesses to an ending. I saw Liam at the altar, and my heart, which I thought had turned to stone, ached. He was beautiful, his eyes shining with so much love, so much hope. He saw me, and his face broke into a smile that was so pure, so full of trust, that it almost broke my resolve. He was the one good thing in a world of lies, and to save him, I had to shatter his world. And then I saw Ethan. He was standing beside his brother, the perfect best man. He caught my eye as I approached the altar and gave me a subtle, condescending smile. It was a look of triumph. He thought he had already won. He saw my composure as fragility, my silence as surrender. The fool. He was a wolf, smiling at the lamb he was about to devour, not realizing she was leading him to the slaughterhouse. The ceremony began. The priest's words washed over me in a meaningless drone. Dearly beloved, a sacred bond, love and cherish. It all felt like a prelude, the meaningless chatter before the main event. My entire being was focused on a single point in the future, a few minutes away. My eyes kept flicking up to the choir loft, to the small window of the sound booth where I could just make out Kevin's silhouette. I felt the pulse in my neck, a steady rhythmic drumbeat counting down to 0. Then, the moment came. The priest smiled benevolently at the congregation. If anyone here has any reason why Chloe and Liam should not be joined in holy matrimony, speak now or forever hold your peace. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a perfect, pristine silence, holding the entire future within it. I could hear my own blood roaring in my ears. I didn't look at Liam. I looked at Ethan. He took a half step forward. He straightened his tie. He cleared his throat, a small, performative sound that drew every eye in the church. He arranged his face into an expression of profound, theatrical sorrow. This was his moment, the culmination of his long campaign. He was about to become the hero who saved his brother. He opened his mouth. But no words came out of his mouth. Instead, from the speakers woven into the church's ancient stonework, a voice filled the sacred space. His own. It was tinny. It was recorded. And it was damning. It was an accident. His voice, raw and slurred, echoed off the vaulted ceiling. I didn't see the deer. I swerved. I never meant for her to get hurt. A collective gasp swept through the church, a wave of confusion. People looked at Ethan, who had frozen, his face a mask of disbelief. His mouth was still hanging open. And then, a second voice, his father's, boomed through the speakers, full of rage and terrible truth. But she did. Your mother ended up in a wheelchair because of your stupidity, and I buried it. I bribed the tow truck driver. I paid off the reporting officer. I created the story of a phantom car, a hit and run that let you walk away clean while your mother was learning to live with half a body. We have blamed a ghost for 15 years, Ethan. The audio cut out. The silence that followed was a living thing. It was heavier, deeper, and more terrible than any noise. It was a void filled with the shrapnel of a detonated truth. For a moment, nothing happened. The world was a photograph. The priest, his mouth agape. The guests, their faces a gallery of shock and horror. Then, the photograph came to life. I didn't watch the crowd. I watched the three of them. Ethan stood rooted to the spot, his perfect tan gone, his face the color of ash. He looked broken. Not sorry. Just exposed. Annihilated. His father was trying to shrink into his pew, to become invisible. But it was his mother I couldn't look away from. She was staring at her son, at her husband, and for the first time since I had met her, the quiet sadness in her eyes was gone. It was replaced by the fire of a profound and absolute betrayal. The phantom driver who had stolen her life was no phantom. He was her son, and her protector, her husband, was his co-conspirator. Finally, I looked at Liam. He wasn't looking at his brother. He wasn't looking at his parents. He was looking at me. And in his eyes, I saw the true cost of my victory. There was no anger, no hatred, just a bottomless, horrified awe. It was the look of a man who had been woken from a beautiful dream, to find his house was on fire, and the person holding the match was the woman he loved. He was looking at me like he had never truly seen me before. And maybe he hadn't. The wedding, of course, did not happen. The aftermath was a blur of chaos. A woman fainted. Someone started shouting. My own mother grabbed my arm, her face pale, whispering my name over and over like a question. I just stood there, in my white dress, a statue in the eye of a hurricane I had created. I watched the Beaumont family, the great and powerful dynasty, collapse in on itself in the front pew of a silent church. I won. I won completely. Ethan's reputation was not just ruined, it was vaporized. The family's dark secret was now public knowledge. The financial fraud would inevitably be uncovered in the fallout. I had protected Liam. I had gotten justice for his mother. I had achieved everything I set out to do. So, was it worth it? The question hangs in the air, doesn't it? I sit here now, in the quiet that follows the storm, and I don't have an easy answer. I destroyed a monster. But to do it, I had to become one myself. I had to use deception and manipulation, the very tools he used against me. I had to lie to the man I love, shattering his innocence in the most brutal way imaginable. I torched my fairy tale ending to expose his toxic reality. There was no peace in my victory, no catharsis, just a cold, quiet emptiness. The rage that had fueled me for weeks was gone, and in its place, there was just silence. The silence of a battlefield after the war is over. Liam and I are talking. It's slow. It's painful. He looks at me differently now, with a kind of fearful respect. He knows I will protect him from anything. But he also knows what I'm capable of. The fortress I built to save our love now has walls so high, I'm not sure he can ever fully get back inside. I didn't save my perfect wedding day. That day is a scar now, a memory of ruin. But I did save the man I love from a life of lies. I gave him the harsh, terrible, and liberating truth. And sometimes, the truth isn't a fairy tale. Sometimes it's a weapon. I saved my marriage by proving I was the most dangerous person in that church. And that's a vow we'll both have to live with.